In the vast reaches of the galaxy, the Zorath Empire was feared by all. It stretched across hundreds of planets, its power unrivaled, its warriors invincible. The Zorath were an ancient species, known for their strength, intelligence, and cold, calculating minds. They had never encountered a foe they couldn't crush, and their queen, Zathanar, was the most feared leader in the galaxy. Her belief was simple. The Zorath were the greatest species in existence, and no other race could ever challenge their dominance. Zathanar ruled with a steady hand, watching over her empire from her magnificent palace on the Zorath homeworld. Every decision she made was with the knowledge that her empire could not be defeated. For centuries, the Zorath had conquered world after world, and there was no one left who could stop them. To her, the other species were nothing more than weaklings, inferior creatures destined to be ruled by her kind. She had never even considered the idea that there might be something, or someone, out there who could change that. But then, something strange started to happen. It began with rumors. At first, they were barely whispers, easy to ignore. A human, they said, had somehow defeated one of the Zorath's most skilled warriors. It didn't make sense. Humans were nothing compared to the Zorath, weak, fragile, and untrained in combat. The very idea that a human could stand against the might of a Zorath fighter was laughable. Zathanar had heard such rumors before, but they were always false. Yet these stories persisted, becoming more detailed with each retelling. The human wasn't just lucky. He was skilled, they said. He had taken down not just one, but several of the Zorath's best warriors. Zathanar scoffed at the idea. It couldn't be true. She had seen humans before, weak and unremarkable. They were a species from a distant planet, insignificant in the grand scheme of the galaxy. There was no way one of them could pose a threat to her empire. But then came the reports. A human, a fighter named Sinax, had done the impossible. He had not only defeated a Zorath champion in single combat, but he had done it in front of hundreds of spectators. The arena where the match had taken place was filled with witnesses, and they had all seen it. The human was fast, clever, and able to outmaneuver the Zorath fighter at every turn. The champion, a Zorath warrior named Naluk, had been one of the fiercest in the Empire. He had never been beaten before, but Sinax had made him fall. And it wasn't just that Naluk had been defeated, it was how he had been defeated. Sinax had used strategy, agility, and his surroundings to turn the fight in his favor, something no Zorath warrior had ever done before. Zathanar was stunned. She called for a full report on the human fighter, eager to understand what had happened. The more she learned, the more her disbelief grew. Sinax wasn't just any ordinary human. He was a warrior, a man who had trained himself in the harshest of conditions, a man who had traveled the galaxy fighting for survival. He had defeated not only Zorath champions, but had also taken on dangerous creatures and other alien species, always coming out on top. His victories were becoming the stuff of legend, and the more stories she heard, the more she realized that this wasn't some fluke. She couldn't believe it. A human, a mere earthling, was challenging the Zorath Empire. It was impossible. There had to be some mistake, some explanation that would prove this was all a misunderstanding. But the reports were clear. Sinax was real, and he was not someone to be underestimated. Zathanar's mind raced. She had built her empire on the belief that the Zorath were the most powerful species in the galaxy. She had believed that no one, no race, could ever rival their strength. But now, here was a human who seemed to defy all reason. He had defeated her warriors and made a name for himself among the stars. Could it be that humans were not as weak as she had thought? The queen was not one to tolerate weakness, and she certainly would not allow the Zorath to be outshined by any other species. She needed to see this human for herself, to understand what made him so special, and, if necessary, to crush this threat before it grew any larger. Zathanar summoned her most trusted generals and advisors to discuss the situation. "We cannot let this human continue to challenge us," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "If he is truly as skilled as the reports suggest, Then we must put an end to this before he becomes a symbol of rebellion. Her generals agreed, though some of them shared her doubt. Should we send a small force to eliminate him? One of them asked. We have the power to crush any threat. Zathanar shook her head. No, this must be dealt with more carefully. We will bring him here, to the capital. I will face him personally. The queen's mind was set. She would confront this human warrior, this Sinax, and prove once and for all that the Zoroth were supreme. It would be a simple matter. She would show him the might of her empire and break his spirit. If he thought he could challenge the Zoroth, he was gravely mistaken. No human, no matter how skilled, could ever stand against the true power of the Zoroth. But in the depths of her mind, a small seed of doubt began to take root. Could it be that the Zoroth had underestimated this human? Could he truly be as dangerous as the reports said? For the first time in her long reign, Queen Zathanar was uncertain. Queen Zathanar sat on her grand throne, staring out at the stars through the enormous windows of her palace. The vastness of the universe seemed endless, but even the stars could not offer her the peace of mind she had always known. The reports about the human fighter, Sinax, filled her with an unease she couldn't ignore. For the first time in her life, Zathanar found herself questioning everything she had once believed about her empire and its superiority. No warrior, no matter how skilled, could ever truly challenge the Zoroth. That had always been her belief. But this human, Sinax, had done the impossible. He was no mere soldier, he was something more. Zathanar couldn't shake the thought that this was no random human, but someone who could truly stand against the might of the Zoroth. She had learned more about him in the past few days than she ever expected to know. Sinax was not a soldier from a military force or an empire. He was an individual, a wanderer who had fought for survival across the galaxy. He had no home planet to return to, no nation to back him. He was just a man, born on Earth, a place Zathanar had long dismissed as insignificant. Yet this very human was shaking the foundations of everything she had worked for. The idea of one single individual challenging her empire was absurd. Yet here she was, unable to deny the truth. Her most trusted advisor, General Dakath, stood beside her, watching her with concern. Your Majesty, you've been quiet for days. Is it the human that troubles you? Zathanar turned her gaze toward him, her face stern. Yes, Dakath. This human, Sinax, has done something that no one should be able to do. He has defeated our warriors, more than one, in fact. I want to know how. Dakath's brow furrowed. We've sent our spies to follow his movements. He fights in arenas, using his cunning, his speed, and his unpredictable style. His battles seem like more than just physical strength. He fights with an intelligence that our warriors are not trained to understand. Zathanar clenched her fists. She had known her warriors were formidable, but now she realized that their strength alone wasn't enough. If this human was truly defeating them, then something deeper was at play, something beyond mere physical prowess. He was using strategy, tactics, and perhaps even psychology. The more Zathanar learned about Sinax, the more her respect for him grew, even though she hated to admit it. It's not just that he fights well, Zathanar continued, her voice dark with frustration. He has a way of making even the fiercest of opponents doubt themselves. He has a presence that disrupts the very battle itself. He doesn't just defeat, he overwhelms his enemies mentally. How could a mere human possess such skill? Dakath nodded thoughtfully. He is more than just a fighter, Your Majesty. He has traveled across the galaxy, defeating beasts, warlords, and alien species, earning respect wherever he goes. His reputation grows with each victory. He has become a symbol of defiance for many of the weaker species. Zathanar's mind raced. Defiance. That word stuck with her. It wasn't just that Sinax was defeating Zoroth warriors. It was that he was doing so in front of the entire galaxy. He was making a statement, not just through his victories, but through his very existence. The weak, the downtrodden, The species that had once bowed to the Zorth were now looking to this human as a symbol of hope. That was something Zathanar could not allow. The Zorth Empire had always been the dominant force in the galaxy, and she would not let some human destroy that. "We must end this, Dakath," Zathanar said, her voice steady but cold. "This human cannot be allowed to continue spreading his influence. I will bring him to my palace, and I will meet him face to face. I will defeat him, and once I do, no one will dare question the might of the Zorth again." Dakath bowed. "It will be as you say, Your Majesty. We will bring him to you." But as he spoke, a thought lingered in the Queen's mind. What if this human was not the enemy she thought him to be? What if he was something more? Could he be the key to understanding something greater, something beyond the Zorth Empire's domination? She shook the thought away. No, Zorth's strength had been built on the belief that they were supreme, and nothing would change that. Not even a human. Days passed, and the plans were set into motion. A small but powerful team of Zorth soldiers was dispatched to capture Sinax. It wasn't going to be a simple task. The human had proven to be elusive, and his ability to fight in strange and unexpected ways made him a difficult target. But the Zorth were prepared for any challenge. They would find him and bring him to the Queen. Sinax, for his part, had no idea what was coming. He had heard rumors of the Zorth seeking him, but he never expected them to act so quickly. He had faced countless enemies in his travels, but this would be different. The Zorth were known for their ruthlessness and their advanced technology. If he was to survive this encounter, he would have to rely on everything he had learned over the years, the strategies, the combat skills, and the will to fight for something greater than himself. As he prepared for the inevitable confrontation, Sinax couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement. He had faced the odds before, and he had always found a way to overcome them. But this time, he was up against an entire empire. It would take everything he had to survive. Zathanar had no idea that, in the coming days, her belief in the Zorth's invincibility would be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The clash between her empire and the human warrior was coming, and neither side would come out unchanged. Queen Zathanar's plans were set in motion. Her mind had already decided. Sinax, the human who had shaken the very foundations of her empire, would be brought before her, and she would personally confront him. The decision was clear. The Zorth Empire could not let such a challenge go unanswered. This human, no matter how skilled, would be humbled. His defiance would be crushed, and Zathanar would prove to the galaxy that the Zorth were untouchable. But there was something unusual about this particular mission. Zathanar had ordered her most trusted generals to oversee the capture of Sinax, yet she was careful in how she worded the order. She wanted him alive, yes, but she also wanted him to be brought in with care. There were reports that Sinax was far more than just a skilled fighter. Some described him as a warrior who could turn any situation in his favor, using the environment to his advantage. That made him unpredictable, and unpredictability was something the Zorth weren't used to. Zathanar couldn't afford to underestimate him. The fleet was prepared. A small but elite group of Zorth soldiers, equipped with the latest technology, was sent to track Sinax down. They had learned his movements, studied his battles, and were now ready to take him on. But the mission wasn't going to be easy. Sinax was known for avoiding capture, using his wits and agility to slip past enemies. He didn't stay in one place for long, and he was always one step ahead. It was clear that he wasn't going to just surrender. Meanwhile, Sinax was preparing for what he had known was coming. It was only a matter of time before the Zorth found him. He had heard the rumors, the whispers of his growing reputation. The Zorth, the most powerful empire in the galaxy, had finally taken notice of him. He wasn't sure how they had found him so quickly, but it didn't matter. He had faced challenges before, and he would face this one the same way. Sinax had learned long ago that the key to survival was adaptability. It wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about being able to think on his feet, to react to situations before they happened. His time as a soldier, then a wandering fighter, had taught him that. And now, as he traveled through the galaxy, his name had become synonymous with victory. His victories had been hard-earned, and he had no intention of stopping now. He knew that facing the Zoroth in a direct battle was dangerous, but he wasn't afraid. His mind was his greatest weapon, and he would use it to outsmart them, just as he had done with countless others before. It wouldn't be enough to just fight back. He had to be strategic. Synnax's reputation wasn't just about fighting. It was about making sure that when he did fight, he did it in a way that left a lasting impact. But the Zoroth weren't going to make it easy. They had already surrounded him, closing in. His options were running out. He could run, but that would only buy him a little more time. Eventually, they would catch him. He could try to resist, but he knew that the Zoroth were relentless. No, Synnax had to confront them on his terms. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was not just about survival. It was about something bigger. It was about sending a message. As he looked out at the vast stretch of stars, he couldn't help but think about what he had been fighting for all this time. It wasn't just about personal glory. It was about something far more important, about showing others that they didn't have to bow to anyone. It didn't matter if they were from Earth, from the Zoroth Empire, or any other corner of the galaxy. They all deserved to stand tall. Back on Zoroth's homeworld, Queen Zathanar had grown impatient. Her mind was set on one thing. Synnax would be brought before her, and she would prove that the Zoroth were not to be challenged. Her generals had reported that they were closing in on him, and soon he would be in her grasp. She stood on her balcony, looking out over the palace gardens. She was confident in her plan, but beneath her confidence, she couldn't ignore the small flicker of uncertainty. She had never encountered someone like Synnax before. No one had ever stood against her empire and lived to tell the tale. Still, Zathanar was the queen. Her power was unquestioned, her strength legendary. She would not allow some human to change that. The human warrior, Synnax, had no idea what awaited him. As he traveled, moving through the shadows, he felt the weight of what was about to come. His mind was sharp, his senses heightened. He knew that once he was captured, there would be no escaping the Zoroth's grip. But he didn't intend to go down without a fight. He would face them head-on. He would meet the queen herself. It wasn't about defeating her, at least not in the way most would think. Synnax knew that if he was to stand a chance, it wasn't just about defeating an enemy in combat. It was about making them understand something they had never considered before. The Zoroth, with all their power and technology, relied on their might. But there was more to strength than just physical force. Synnax had always believed in the power of will, the ability to fight for something greater than oneself. It was why he had fought so hard in the first place, why he had never given up. He had seen too many civilizations fall, too many people oppressed, to turn a blind eye to injustice. And now he had to show the Zoroth that there was something far stronger than their empire. The day came when Synnax was captured. The Zoroth forces surrounded him, but he didn't resist. Instead, he allowed them to take him, knowing that this was only the beginning. He was brought aboard their flagship, bound but not beaten. He had faced worse, and he would face whatever came next. When Zathanar arrived, standing before him in her grand throne room, her eyes locked onto his with a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. She expected to see fear, but there was none. Only determination. "Do you understand who I am, human?" she asked, her voice cold and powerful. Synnax met her gaze. "I do, and I understand what you're trying to protect. But no empire, no matter how mighty, is invincible." Zathanar raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his defiance. "We shall see about that." And with that, the challenge had truly begun. The grand throne room of Zoroth's capital was cold and imposing, filled with the weight of centuries of power. The stone walls seemed to hum with the history of the empire, and the massive throne, adorned with the symbols of victory, stood in the center, towering over the room. Queen Zathanar sat upon it, her eyes locked on Synnax, who stood in chains before her. The defiance in his gaze only seemed to intensify the coldness in her heart. Zathanar had expected to see fear, maybe even desperation in the human's eyes, but there was nothing of the sort. Instead, there was only a calm determination that both intrigued and frustrated her. She had crushed the enemies of her empire without hesitation for years, but this human, this one single human, was unlike any opponent she had ever faced. "I have brought you here for one reason, human," Zathanar said, her voice smooth, but carrying the weight of her authority. "To remind you of the truth that no one can stand against the Zoroth Empire." Sinax remained silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. He had been in situations like this before, facing overwhelming odds, but there was something different about this moment. The fate of more than just himself was on the line now. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for hope, for the message that anyone, no matter their size or strength, could stand up against tyranny. "I didn't come here to challenge your empire, Queen." Sinax finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I came here to show that strength isn't just about power. It's about the will to fight for what's right." Zathanar's eyes narrowed. "Right? You speak of right, as though such a thing exists beyond the will of the Zoroth. Your kind does not know true strength. You are weak, a species with no future, bound to the past." Sinax's lips curved slightly upward, though his expression was not one of arrogance. "That may be true for some, but not all of us. Your empire has crushed many, but it has also made countless enemies. The galaxy is changing, Queen. People are waking up to the truth." Her gaze hardened, and for a moment, Zathanar said nothing. She had never met a human like this before, someone who was not only brave but willing to stand against the very heart of the Zoroth Empire. What intrigued her most was that he wasn't even afraid of death. In fact, his calmness in the face of certain destruction made her question herself. "You misunderstand, human," Zathanar said finally, her voice low. "You will die here today, just like all who dare to challenge the Zoroth. But first, you will understand what it means to be insignificant, to be nothing." Sinax's hands were bound by chains, but his spirit was far from restrained. "We'll see about that." Zathanar stood from her throne, walking down the steps toward Sinax. She was imposing, her presence radiating power. She looked him up and down, sizing him up. Despite his smaller stature compared to the Zoroth, there was something about him that made him seem larger than life. It was a quality Zathanar hadn't expected to find in a human. "You do not understand the nature of strength, Sinax," she said, stopping just a few feet in front of him. "You are nothing more than a passing distraction, a fleeting star in the sky that will burn out quickly." Sinax lifted his chin slightly, still maintaining eye contact. "Maybe, or maybe your empire is the distraction, and maybe the future of the galaxy isn't as set as you think." Zathanar's anger flared, but she controlled it, her eyes cold as ice. "You speak of things you don't understand. What hope does your future have against the might of the Zoroth? We are everywhere. We are unstoppable. Your rebellion is nothing but a dream." "Dreams are where things begin," Sinax replied, his tone unwavering. "They're what people fight for. They're what give us hope when there's none left." Zathanar's lips tightened into a thin line, and she turned away from him, her mind racing. The human's words, though simple, struck a chord within her. She had always believed that power came from domination and fear. She had believed that the strength of the Zoroth was unchallenged, that no force in the galaxy could stand against it. But here, standing in front of her, was a human who believed in something more, something she had never considered: hope. She walked to the far side of the room, her thoughts in turmoil. It was impossible for a mere human to challenge the Zoroth, to create a spark of hope that could spread across the galaxy. It was absurd. Yet, a part of her, the part she had buried long ago, couldn't help but wonder if Sinax was right. Could the future be shaped by something other than power? Could this human, this warrior, actually change the course of history? Zathanar turned back toward Sinax, her expression dark and unreadable. "Enough of your talk. I will show you what true strength is." With a single gesture, she signaled to the guards, who immediately moved to prepare the arena for battle. The air in the room grew tense. Zathanar was about to put Sinax to the ultimate test, to show him what it meant to face the full might of the Zorath Empire. As the guards unshackled Sinax's chains, he stood tall. His body was prepared for battle, but his mind was focused on something more than just survival. He had made it this far because he refused to back down. He wasn't here just to fight. He was here to make the Zorath see that there was something stronger than fear and domination. When the doors of the arena opened, the roar of the crowd filled the air. Zathanar stood beside him, watching with a cold gaze as Sinax was led into the center of the battlefield. Her empire had faced many challenges, but none like this. "Your fight begins now," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Show the galaxy what your kind is made of. But remember this, your fight is already lost." Sinax looked out into the arena, where fierce warriors and dangerous creatures awaited him. He didn't flinch. He didn't fear what was ahead. He knew that this fight wasn't just about defeating the Zorath. It was about proving that anyone, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed, could make a difference. The battle began. The arena was massive, its walls towering high, and the crowd's roar echoed through the stone halls, vibrating the air around Sinax. He stood at the center, eyeing the surroundings. The floor was made of hard, cold stone, smooth but littered with strange devices and weapons placed strategically across the area. All around him, shadows shifted as Zorath warriors, giants in their own right, prepared to fight. The challenge had been set. Queen Zathanar stood high above, in the royal viewing platform, observing the scene below with cold eyes. She was confident in her decision. The human would not survive this test. Her warriors were the strongest in the galaxy, and the arena was designed to destroy any who faced it. The Zorath did not lose. That was a rule that had stood the test of time. Sinax knew he was in an unfamiliar and dangerous place, but it didn't matter. He had faced challenges before, though none quite like this. He had fought in arenas, sure, but nothing this large. Nothing with such stakes. Yet there was no fear in his heart. The way he had lived his life, the way he had survived the countless battles he had already fought, had prepared him for moments like this. What mattered now wasn't his size or strength, but his mind. Zathanar had underestimated him. She thought of him as a simple warrior, a lone human who had somehow made it this far. She didn't understand what made him dangerous. It was not just his fighting ability, but his adaptability, his ingenuity. He could turn the tables even in the most hopeless of situations. As the battle began, the first of the Zorath warriors charged forward, their massive bodies moving with impressive speed. They were armed with energy blades, their weapons glowing bright, as they swung them toward Sinax. He didn't flinch. With quick reflexes, he ducked under the blade and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the swing that would have cleaved him in half. The Zorath warrior growled in frustration, turning to strike again. Sinax, however, had already seen the weakness in his opponent's movements. The warrior's heavy armor restricted its flexibility, and Sinax used that to his advantage. With a sudden burst of speed, he darted behind the warrior, grabbing a nearby weapon, a sharp-pointed spear, and drove it into a vulnerable joint in the back of the warrior's armor. The Zorath warrior let out a howl, collapsing to the ground, its energy blade skidding away. The crowd gasped in shock, stunned by the human's speed and precision. Even Zathanar, who had watched countless battles unfold in this very arena, narrowed her eyes in disbelief. This human, this fighter, was not like the others he had faced. He was faster, more strategic. He had no fear. Another Zorath warrior stepped forward, a massive brute covered in thick, reflective armor. It was clear that this one was more powerful than the first, his body built for sheer force rather than agility. He didn't waste time with fancy moves. He simply charged at Sinax, hoping to overpower him with brute strength. Sinax, however, was ready. The warrior's charge was predictable, and Synax used his agility to his advantage once again. He sidestepped the initial attack, grabbing the warrior's arm and flipping him onto the ground with surprising strength. The arena shook with the force of the Zoroth's massive body hitting the stone floor. The brute snarled in anger, struggling to get back up. Synax stood over him, his eyes scanning the creature's movements. He knew that this opponent would not be defeated by speed alone. Synax needed to outsmart him. He grabbed a heavy chain from the ground nearby and swung it at the warrior's exposed face, temporarily stunning him. In that moment, Synax rushed forward, disabling the warrior's weapon and knocking him out of the fight. The crowd went silent. Zathanar's expression hardened as she watched the human take down two of her strongest warriors with ease. This was no longer a fight. This was a display of something else, something the Zoroth hadn't prepared for. She had always believed that their physical superiority was enough, that their strength alone could crush anything in their path. But here was Synax, proving that strength was not the only factor in battle. Intelligence, precision, and the will to survive were equally powerful. Zathanar stood from her platform, her eyes flashing with a new kind of determination. She could not let this human make a mockery of her empire. It was time to take matters into her own hands. "Release the beast," she commanded. The doors on the far side of the arena slowly began to open, and a low growl echoed through the space. The ground trembled as the massive creature was released. It was a Zoroth war beast, a hulking, armored beast with claws sharp enough to tear through metal. The crowd cheered as the beast lumbered toward Synax, its massive form casting a shadow over the arena. Synax, seeing the creature approach, didn't hesitate. He knew this would be the hardest challenge yet. The war beast's speed was unmatched, and its claws could tear through anything in its path. But Synax had been in battles with creatures just like this before. He had fought beasts on far-off worlds, each one fiercer than the last. But none of them had the advantage of the terrain. This arena was his advantage. He quickly scanned the surroundings, noticing the structure above him. There were overhead platforms connected by metal beams, and the walls of the arena were littered with scaffolding and abandoned weapons. Synax smiled to himself. He had a plan. The war beast charged, its massive claws swiping at Synax with terrifying speed. He leaped into the air, narrowly avoiding the swipe. He grabbed hold of a hanging chain from above, using it to swing around and land behind the beast. It howled in frustration, turning toward him, but Synax was already on the move. He darted to a higher platform, quickly gathering a few scattered weapons. The beast followed, its rage making it unpredictable. Synax, however, remained calm. He waited for the right moment, then threw a small explosive device that attached itself to the beast's armor. The explosion wasn't enough to kill it, but it weakened its defense. That was all Synax needed. He jumped down, landing with perfect precision on the beast's back. With a quick motion, he disarmed the creature, using his momentum to disarm its claws and render it immobile. The crowd went wild. Zathanar stood frozen, her mind racing. This human was more than she had ever imagined. He had taken down two warriors, outsmarted her best soldier, and now had just defeated the war beast. But the battle was far from over. Synax's fight was just beginning, and Zathanar's pride was on the line. She would stop him, no matter what it took. The human had proven himself formidable, but Zathanar would show him that the Zoroth Empire could not be outsmarted. The true test had just begun. The battle in the arena raged on, and Synax stood tall amid the chaos, his breath steady and his heart pounding with the thrill of the fight. He had taken down two of the Zoroth's fiercest warriors, and even their mighty war beast was now lying defeated at his feet. The crowd, a mix of awe and disbelief, had fallen silent. The Zoroth were not accustomed to such challenges. Their empire had crushed every enemy they encountered, but this human had changed the rules. Zathanar, standing high above in the royal balcony, watched with a gaze that was equal parts anger and admiration. Her pride, which had been so carefully cultivated over countless years of conquest, was now at risk. The human had done the impossible. He had shown her that strength wasn't just about size or power. It was about will, strategy, and an unyielding belief in one's cause. And as much as she hated to admit it, Synax had won the battle in ways she hadn't expected. Her hands clenched into fists. "Enough," she shouted, her voice echoing across the arena. "This charade ends now." The crowd hushed in response to her command. Zathanar was not just a queen. She was a force of nature, the embodiment of her empire's unyielding might. Her words held the weight of 1,000 victories. It was clear that the human's defiance had struck a nerve. She would not allow this to go on any longer. With a swift motion, she raised her hand and gestured to her most trusted generals. "Release the last phase. Prepare the final test." The ground beneath the arena trembled. Synax's senses were on high alert as he watched Zathanar's command unfold. He knew there was more to this battle than he had seen so far. His instincts were rarely wrong. Something was coming, and it wasn't going to be easy. Moments later, massive metal doors at the far end of the arena slowly opened with a deep mechanical groan. The air filled with a low, rumbling sound that echoed through the entire structure. Synax turned toward the doors, his eyes narrowing. A huge figure stepped into the arena, its silhouette dark against the light that shone from above. It was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen, an enormous armored war machine, a monstrous construct built for destruction. It was a living weapon, its eyes glowing with an eerie red light, its metal-plated body reinforced with shields and energy barriers. The sheer size of the machine made the war beast look small in comparison. This was no ordinary enemy. The crowd erupted in excitement. They had all come to see the end of the human. Zathanar had promised them an unforgettable spectacle, and she had delivered. But this was the final trial, the last test of Synax's survival. Synax stood his ground, assessing the situation. The machine's size and firepower were overwhelming, but he wasn't going to back down. He had survived so far by relying on his quick thinking, and he would do so again. He scanned the battlefield, looking for any weakness he could exploit. The machine was armored heavily, but its joints and the spaces between its plates seemed to be its most vulnerable areas. He wasn't just fighting for his own life now. He was fighting for something much bigger. He was fighting to show that no empire, no matter how powerful, could force people into submission. The Zoroth may have ruled for centuries, but they would not break him. They would not break the will of humanity. The mechanical beast took its first step forward, sending a shockwave through the ground. It was slow, but each movement was calculated and precise. The massive metal claws clanged as they scraped across the stone surface, and a powerful energy cannon mounted on its shoulder hummed to life, glowing bright with deadly power. Synax's heart raced, but his mind remained focused. He had fought machines before, huge, terrifying machines, but the trick was always the same. Don't panic. Find the weak points, outsmart the opponent, and strike fast. The machine launched an energy blast in his direction. Synax didn't flinch. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast as it exploded behind him, sending a shower of sparks and debris flying into the air. He rolled to his feet and continued running, using the arena's many levels and structures to his advantage. The machine lumbered after him, firing its weapon again, but Synax was already moving, staying one step ahead. He darted behind a large metal pillar and took a deep breath. The machine had stopped for a moment, its systems recalibrating. Synax could hear the mechanical whirring as it adjusted its targeting. This was his chance. With a burst of speed, he leaped from behind cover and ran straight toward the machine's exposed side. The energy cannon on its shoulder hummed again, but Synax wasn't there to be hit. He slid underneath the machine's massive leg, narrowly avoiding the swipe of its clawed feet. His movements were swift, precise, and calculated. As he passed under the machine, he spotted a small weak point where its armor plates didn't quite align. Without hesitation, he pulled a small device from his belt, a small explosive charge, and attached it to the vulnerable area. He had no time to admire his work. The machine's massive arm swung toward him, but he was already moving, rolling out of the way just in time. The explosion rang out, loud and bright, as the charge detonated against the machine's armor. Sparks flew, and the machine staggered, its systems sputtering. Sinax didn't waste a second. He moved in, diving towards another weak spot, a gap in the machine's joint where the armor had cracked. This was his moment. With one powerful strike, he jammed a metal rod into the gap, forcing it deeper into the joint. The machine groaned and screeched as its systems began to overload. Energy crackled, sparks flew, and then an explosion. The machine's energy core detonated, sending a shockwave through the arena. The massive war machine collapsed to the ground with a deafening crash, smoke and fire billowing from its broken body. Sinax stood in the center of the arena, breathing heavily, his body covered in dust and sweat. He had done it. He had defeated the machine. The crowd was silent, staring in stunned disbelief. Zathanar's face was unreadable, but inside, a storm of emotions brewed. Her greatest weapon had been destroyed, and a human, a single human, had done it. The Zoroth Empire had never been challenged like this before. Sinax's eyes met Zathanar's across the arena. He wasn't finished yet. The fight was not over. There was more to do, more to prove. He had shown them all that strength wasn't just about power. It was about heart. And the human heart, he knew, was the most powerful force in the galaxy. Zathanar's eyes narrowed, her pride wounded. "You've won this round, human," she said, her voice cold. "But the war is far from over." Sinax smiled. "Then let the real fight begin." The dust from the massive explosion still hung in the air, drifting lazily across the arena like the remnants of a battle that had just shifted the balance of power. Sinax stood at the center of the arena, chest heaving from the physical exertion, but his mind remained sharp, focused on the next step. He had defeated the Zoroth's greatest weapon, but he knew that his victory was not complete. The real challenge was still ahead. Zathanar, high in the royal balcony, remained silent. Her eyes were fixed on the human warrior, her thoughts darkening. No one had ever done this to her empire before. Never had she imagined that one human, a being she considered inferior, could cause such disruption. And yet, here he was, standing tall and proud, the victor of every trial she had thrown at him. The crowd, once roaring with excitement, was now unnervingly quiet. Even they could not ignore what had just happened. The Zoroth were known to be a mighty, unyielding force across the galaxy, and yet this human had not only survived, they had triumphed. Sinax looked up at Zathanar, his eyes unwavering. The challenge was clear. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for respect. The Zoroth had underestimated him from the beginning, but now he had shown them his strength, his resolve. He would not back down. Zathanar's expression was unreadable. She had never known defeat, but she would not let one human tarnish her legacy. She rose from her throne, her dark eyes narrowing with determination. "This is not over, human," she said coldly, her voice carrying through the silence. "You may have defeated my warriors, but you have not faced me. I am the Queen of the Zoroth. I am the ruler of an empire that spans across galaxies. You cannot win against me." The words echoed in the arena, and Sinax's eyes locked on hers. The tension in the air was thick. He had come so far, fought so hard. But this would be the true test of his strength, his will to succeed. This was not a fight he could simply win with skill alone. This would be a battle of resolve, of heart. Zathanar raised her hand, signaling her guards. The walls around the arena slowly began to shift, revealing hidden compartments and weapons. She had come prepared for this moment. She was not going to let her empire crumble because of a single human. As the walls moved, Sinax scanned the room, watching for any new threats. He could sense the change in the environment, the growing weight of the moment. The arena had been designed for grand spectacle, but now it seemed like a prison, closing in around him. It was clear that the final test was more than just another fight. Zathanar wasn't just going to try to kill them. She was going to break him. "You've shown your strength," Zathanar continued, her voice growing colder. "But strength alone will never be enough. Your people will never be able to rise up against us. We are the Zorath, and we do not lose." Sinax tightened his fists, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His actions would do the talking. He had already proved his physical strength and his ability to think quickly in the face of danger. Now, it was time for him to show Zathanar something she hadn't counted on. Hope. The air around him shifted again. The Zorath Queen had triggered something in the arena. Sinax had no time to hesitate. From the dark corners of the arena, a new threat emerged. More Zorath warriors, each one larger and more menacing than the last, stepped forward. They were equipped with energy shields and powerful weapons. Sinax's mind raced as he quickly assessed his options. The numbers were against him, but he had faced worse odds before. He could not afford to get distracted. Zathanar wanted to break him, to see him fall in front of the entire empire, but he would not give her the satisfaction. He would rise. He would fight. With a swift motion, Sinax sprinted forward, dodging an incoming energy blast. The warriors charged, their heavy footsteps pounding against the stone floor, but Sinax was already moving, already calculating his next move. He was faster than they were, more agile. He used the environment to his advantage, leaping over obstacles and darting between the massive stone pillars that lined the arena. The battle was chaotic, the air filled with the sounds of energy blasts, clashing weapons, and the roar of the Zorath warriors. Sinax fought with precision, targeting the weak points in their armor, using their size against them. He disarmed one, knocking the weapon from its hand and sending it crashing to the ground. Another warrior tried to corner him, but Sinax slid under its reach and kicked out its legs, bringing it crashing to the floor. The Zorath warriors were strong, but they lacked the flexibility and adaptability that Sinax possessed. He had trained for this, preparing his mind and body for moments like this. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a strategist, always thinking ahead, always staying one step ahead of his enemies. As the last Zorath warrior fell, Sinax took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his brow. He had survived, but the fight was far from over. The arena was still alive with the hum of energy and the glow of weapons. The real battle was not against the warriors. It was against the queen herself. Zathanar's figure appeared before him, descending from her platform with a slow, deliberate motion. Her eyes burned with rage, but there was something else in them, something new. She had never faced an opponent like this before. "You are stronger than I thought, human," she admitted, her voice low and dangerous. "But strength alone is not enough to defeat the Zorath. I am the heart of this empire. You will never defeat me." Sinax met her gaze, his voice steady. "We'll see about that." Zathanar's eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else in them now, a flicker of doubt. The human had proven himself, not just through his strength, but through his resilience, his ability to keep fighting no matter the odds. She had underestimated him, and now she realized it was too late. The entire arena was silent, as if holding its breath. The final decision, the final moment, was upon them. Would Sinax rise again, as he always had, or would Zathanar crush him and cement the Zorath's unchallenged rule? The queen raised her hand, the air around her crackling with energy. The battle had reached its climax, and only one would emerge victorious. Would it be the Zorath, or would the human warrior prove that no empire could stand against the power of the human spirit? Time seemed to slow, the world standing still for one fleeting moment. The final battle was about to begin.